This particular session 2, supposed to be from 1 to 2 p.m., would deal with financing models, media funds, joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, so on and so forth. And just for those who have not had a time to read, because you usually outsource reading as well, I'll read out. So what's driving profitable growth at leading media entertainment companies? Investments are made with the objective of scale and efficiency. How will deal dynamics be impacted as today's behemoths make for tomorrow's disruptors? Will solidity of structures ultimately lead to solidity? What legal, tax, regulatory frameworks will be created to allow flexibility while also protecting intellectual property? You know, Shekhar mentioned for a day we will have IP in future, I think, and within one day, how do you monetize? How are domestic and cross-border media funds have been evolving as a vehicle for investment in M&E industry? What are structures for financing, monetization, exits? How will crowdfunding level the playing field? And we will discuss the landscape of deals taking place, some case studies, multi-jurisdictional structures and related legal and tax issues, targeting Indian high net worth individuals, and so on and so forth. So in this particular session, we have AVT Shankardass. Can you raise your hand, please? Okay. Gowree Gokhale, she's our partner in M&E practice group. Sky Moore, his partner is Stroock. He is famous for his Reliance Dreamwork deal, 850 million, and for a number of other things that you have done. You may also talk about yourself when you know, don't worry about it. And Karen Robson.
Shekhar.
Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, by the who's you? Shekhar. Welcome. Thank you. No problem. Thank you. And Sharad Bhatt. Okay. Arnold Peter and Nitin Chawla. Feel free to talk about yourself for 10 seconds or so.
This one I'm not going to talk much about. They make all the deals and we do all the
Okay.
work.
So
That's what really happens.
I think all the esoteric things we talk in the morning, I think, comes down to deal making at times, some point in time or the other. So we are now on the ground level from, I don't know, 65,000 65,000 feet above, like Concord, but now we are on the ground level. And it would be wonderful to have some, perspective. Maybe, Shekhar, would you want to start with something? Because I think you should be talking a little bit more than me.
Seeing as I started my life as an accountant,
Yeah.
and then gave up because I thought that's the one thing I'm not good at. So I don't think I'm going to be capable of talking about deal making. What I can say is this. We have Jeffrey Chan. Jeffrey, would you say hello please to everybody? Jeffrey Chan is CEO of the Webunar Film Group, which is one of the most
Welcome.
one of the most established film groups in China. I've met his chairman and founder often. We used to both be on the Singapore Media Development Authority board. I'd like Jeffrey to come in one time because what fascinates me, so my question is, in all this deal making, we'll be talking about deal making in Hollywood, we'll be talking about deal making between India and Hollywood. I'm fascinated, have been fascinated for years about what are the potential possibilities of deal making between China and India. And to me, the fascinating thing is, if we are able to make, deal between China and India, are we going to be the world beaters? China's already world beaters, sorry. But are we going to be unassailable if we can make deals together in the media and entertainment field? And it goes beyond film into social marketing, into social media, into all those kind of deals. So how do you handle deal makings? For me, I'm here to listen. Thank you.
Maybe we can start with Sky. I think he's put together one of the largest deals in this particular sector and between the two largest companies in the world. Sky, I think it would be a good start, to have you and tell us a little bit more about you. But about the deals and how, what did you find interesting and how was it difficult or was it different from what you normally do? Did you encounter any cultural issues or something like that? I think we all want to know how to do business with India.
Yes, thank you so much. I do a lot of cross-border transactions, and words to the wise, things to think about on any cross-border transaction. The first thing to think about is tax, because I've watched a number of deals unravel at the end because people didn't think about tax, and there's withholding taxes and local taxes and income taxes and VAT, and so that's just one, one
No, I can understand you because I became international tax lawyer in a number of countries.
Yeah.
One reason was in India we have every kind of tax. You have income tax, wealth tax, gift tax, super tax, third tax, sales tax, every kind of tax.
Yes, yes.
So anywhere in the world I went, I had just no problem in handling. And that's why I think I have most of my clients in the US now
Yes.
doing business with India. I think that was very helpful, but thank you so much.
Second thing is always, keeping time, the time difference, you'll be up late at night. And I don't know how India ended up on at 13 and a half hours ahead. Like, where'd that half hour come from? But I do a lot of calls at, 3 in the morning or whatever. And always also think about how do you get the money out of that country, because both India and China have restricted currencies, and so you have to go through this whole bank process, and people go, oh my God, at the end, and
True.
kind of have to think about that up front. So that's again, things to think about. So tax, the time difference, getting money out of the country. Also the whole cultural, you have to bridge cultures, and that's really the most challenging part. And I will tell you, there is, for example, a world of difference between India and China. The way they approach the industry is just so remarkably different. India is, in my experience, I represent Reliance, I represent UTV, Tunes, a number of Indian companies, and they have a global outlook where they willing to invest in Hollywood, and also they view it on a global scale, and they want to be the next, Tata, the next global empire. China is generally a very different approach. They want to, their focus is very China-centric. So they're always focused on co-production, production in China, distribution in China, Chinese language, something. So it's just a very different focus between those two countries. So I'm optimistic that the U.S. will still act as the hub between India and China, so they don't cut us out. So those are just some kind of global issues that come up. The transactions are much more complex because of those factors. They really just get kind of wild and crazy.
Yeah. AVT, you want to say something?
There's something about China and India that I noticed. When you come to India and you start making a deal, everybody says, when you say, so we have a deal, they'll say. And if you go to China and say, do you have a deal, they go, no. In neither case do you know whether it's a yes or a no. Right?
Well, in
Right?
China
He's doing
sometimes,
it now.
I'll tell
Jeff
you,
is doing it now.
one thing to keep in mind also is that in China sometimes the negotiation starts after the contract is signed.
Yes, right.
India, often you don't sign contract at all and move on, So I think that's another difference. Maybe AVT you want to say, or Shekhar you want to add something else?
No, please
okay,
go ahead.
Fine.
I don't sign contracts. I've done films where
I know.
time I've had to sign a contract is when the tax guy says, you got paid more than you say. No, I've got a contract. Where's your contract? Oh no, better sign it. So the film's over and done, released. It's just a handshake.
Yeah.
It's
Everything
amazing the number of things that get done on a handshake.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so.
AVT, you would like to say a few words?
Well,
You've been operating between UK and India.
India and the United States for the content that they have in the United States, but albeit a very financially engineered panel, I'll come at a financial discussion from a rather academic perspective. The various elements of media and creating media and the industries that surround the funding of media, which is then consumed by people, is how it's perceived. And it's rather the other way around. I personally consider the human endeavor to seek entertainment man's fourth necessity after food, clothing, and shelter is the need for entertainment from caveman to modern man. And the means by which it's created, it's consumed, it's come a long way, and it's in a continued state of development and flux, which is actually very exciting for all of us. However, in more recent times, as we've gathered from the last panel, there's been a considerable social evolution, and we don't always recognize it too easily, and in many ways it starts impacting us financially. Through the 80s and the 90s, the North American cinematic presence was most prevalent as nations around the world were in awe of the sheer size and scale of the development of this continent. It was reflected in the content globally. All-American content was at its peak. I entered an industry wherein it was essential that one made peace with the fact that 75% of funding, content, and market share was American. And more so, it was in the hands of major studios and major companies. Today, the story is rather different. The numbers have switched over. Most of the funding of content is independent. The market for content creation is independent. The consumption is 75% international. The US domestic market is increasingly in the minority when you put anything out there, no matter what medium you're using. This is a good thing. The only reason it might be a cause for concern is if we don't evolve along with this market. Fundamentally, the burgeoning societies in many nations, including China and India, they no longer simply seek to view content from the United States which reflects an aspirational life. They are rapidly growing middle classes which seek to engage in content which reflects their journey. I think it's the point Shekhar made to the question I asked, that what's quality? And he said it's relative. You have to be able to relate to it. The size and scale and the antecedents of this content are immaterial. The financial performance reflects this, most of all. What's rather interesting to me personally is how we incorporate this in our discussion of financial transactions and the vessels and structures that enable and sustain future forms of media and entertainment. Almost 15 years ago, I ran a company called Victory in London, which was focused on enabling Hollywood productions to make best use of UK and European tax benefits in Germany and even in South Africa. Any endeavor to simply use tax incentives to unlock the purse of high net worth individuals or multinationals, or an effort to bolster investment into production is destined to fail, as it was in the UK tax structure. A conversation, which I presume and I hope we're having here, about a sustainable financial model cannot be without a conversation about profitability and the content and the quality of that content. The UK system was a case in point. There was no focus on the quality and how it reflected in people's lives and how they related to it. This was my pet peeve. Every conference and gathering would engineer detailed discussions about structure and financial models, and at no juncture was there any discussion about the foundations on which these models are made successful, the fundamental quality. I shifted focus in my last fund from investments of a large scale in motion picture to smaller material. I came to realize that content designed around the lives that people are leading today is a safer bet. We have access now to a very astute global investor around the world, no matter which nation, North America or China or India, wherever it might be. And one of the other impacting changes to our business is the escalating cost of creating content, but also of marketing content. This impacts a product more than anything else today. The tax benefits are really one of the major features that help us de-risk, and they provide a cushion which can allow a fund manager today to mitigate the exposure they have on any product or any portfolio. This is the specific purpose of using such schemes, and if they're properly used and included in any global fund structure, they provide the ability to give investors a continued and sustainable set of returns which leads to growth, continued growth. So,
Thank you.
I mean, to finish off, I'll just say that investment in media and entertainment today is investment in our future, in our way of life. And it's crucial for us to keep inventing schemes that make this possible and make it sustainable. And I really hope this discussion particularly also engineers such collaborations and such strategy.
Thank you. I think, can I have Sharad tell us, they have unlimited pool of funds, So Bank of America, so not to worry. And Merrill Lynch put together, so what more do you want? So, Can we have some ideas as to how can we get money from you? So everybody is looking for some, at least, if not too much.
No, I appreciate that. And thanks all for the session. I think we started off really well with the morning session. And, as Nishith, Desai just mentioned, we're going from the 65,000 foot level down to the ground. The fortunate part of that 65,000 is we can talk, abstract. We can talk, ideas.
Oh, sorry. You have to
Sorry.
repeat everything.
Is that better? Okay. So, when we're at that 65,000 foot level, we can talk in abstract, we can talk in ideas, and we can think about, what can work. But, as we some of the questions we got towards the end were more specifically, well, how do I get my financing if, the costs are so high above the line? These are the types of things when you get down to the ground level like we are in the legal and the finance side, that's where unfortunately we can't be as abstract, can't be as, open, and, so I can provide some, general ideas in terms of how the financing works. But I think, I'll speak for myself, but in terms of actually disclosing structures and types and case studies, I think that's something that, unfortunately, as we get closer to that detail level, that's where we have to be a little bit more cautious there. But generally speaking, to address, AVT's comments, initially, what we had when the funds were flowing a lot more freely, you had a lot of sort of just mathematical modeling. So you had a situation where you have a bunch of wealthy investors that say, okay, here's X amount of dollars, and let's run with that because we know that if we get a bank attached to it, and if we know that if we run some mathematical model, we can't lose money if we do, X number of iterations, and we do all kinds of simulations. And that type of financing isn't available anymore because, needless to say, times have changed, and those structures haven't really been sustainable. So what has happened, to AVD's point, is what are ways that banks can get comfortable from a risk mitigation standpoint? What are the sort of contracts that we can lend against? Just as an abstract example, let's just say you have a producer who's saying, I want to produce a movie of X number of budget, and I have a contract from this country, an agreement to purchase the rights for this particular distribution channel for X amount. Those are the types of things. Or let's say, I'm making my movie in Canada, or I'm making my movie in Louisiana, and they have this type of an incentive program where if I spend X number of dollars there, generally speaking, I'll get X number back. So those are the types of things that are more prevalent now, generally speaking. And so those are the ways, just using one example, that banks get more comfortable with the risk associated with the financing.
Mm-hmm. Let me have Arnold, Peter now, I think.
Sure. So very much like Sky, most of my transactions that I work on are cross-border deals, primarily between India and the US, and virtually all of them are content deals. Some financing, but primarily content deals. And I think this conference really, and this particular panel, presents a unique opportunity to drill down a little deeper and talk about, on a more granular level, what some of the opportunities and benefits are, and what some of the challenges are in those cross-border transactions. China, obviously, everyone compares China and India, doing business in China, doing business in India. For me, and I think for probably most deal makers in that space, right now, India is eminently more reasonable and more easier place to do deals. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, common language. India, not everybody in India speaks Hindi. In fact, it's the predominant language, but India has 3, 4 very dominant languages that in many respects are as different as French and German. So the default language, the language of science, commerce, business, is English. So we have that in common. When I've done a few of my Chinese deals, we've had to translate everything into English and Chinese. In India, we don't have to do that. We have a common legal system, sometimes as dysfunctional in both countries, but it is a system that we understand. Whereas most Americans and most deal makers and most business executives have difficulty understanding really how the legal system in China works. It's a different system. It's not a system we're comfortable with, we're used to, or we understand. Also, with a common economic system. It's capitalism, especially since the early 1990s when Manmohan Singh opened up India to direct foreign investments. A lot of American companies poured into India. So, we already have a history. The final point, and this I think presents both opportunities and challenges, are that like the US, India has had a very robust, long-standing entertainment industry. In fact, Bollywood is even older than Hollywood by some accounts. And that's both an opportunity because we do have that tradition and that industry, but it's also an obstacle because the way things are done in Bollywood, completely different than the way things are done in Hollywood. And Shekhar mentioned one of those, which is often deals are made based on a handshake, much smaller number of players in the space, so everybody really knows each other. There's a lot of mutual trust. There's a lot of deals that are done on a handshake. That obviously is not the case with the legalistic system that we have in the United States, where every deal has to be papered. And Sky made a very interesting point, which is absolutely true, which is often, in the US, most lawyers, deal makers, you negotiate hard, you negotiate over various deal points, you shake hands, deal's done, everybody lives with it. In India, it's different. Negotiations really start once you shake hands, once pen goes to paper. And often there's really nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's antithetical to the way Americans are used to doing deals. But sometimes you need that flexibility. You need the ability to maneuver and to change directions. But in India, it's worked because of that mutual trust and the fact that you're going to be working together again much sooner than you would in Hollywood.
Thank you.
So those are some of the points that...
Yeah, I think I agree with you that we have a common language base, but we are divided by the same language. Number of times I asked my friends, would you like to have a food? He says, I'm good. We just cannot understand. I know you are good, but do you want food? So, whether it's yes or no, we just cannot understand Americans, that's the thing. And of course, he also talked about negotiation. If you want to do business in India, I'll give you a formula. You'll definitely be very successful in doing business in India. The formula is, we in India want the best in the world, at the cheapest rate, on credit, payable when able, any filling. So if you can comply with these 5 rules, you have all business in India. So maybe Karen, you'll be able to reflect a bit on that, I think. Please, go ahead.
Well, is this working? Yep. I have similar experiences in many ways, but...
But there are very good exceptions, you know that
yes,
as well,
there
right?
are very
Excellent.
good exceptions,
You must...
like my clients and working with your law firm, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
But what I want to say, first of all, is I'm actually Australian, and I was brought up and went to law school and practiced as a lawyer in Australia before I moved to New York. So I tend to think, even though I'm an American lawyer and have been here nearly 30 years, that I have this international perspective that I didn't come from the greatest nation in the world. And I came from a country that we thought was great, but didn't figure as big on the world stage. So in my practice, while I'm an American lawyer, I have done a lot of cross-border work. I've represented a lot of clients and companies from other parts of the world in their dealings with Hollywood. And there are big cultural differences, but there are also similarities. And if we just stick with the Hollywood part of it, I think that over the years I've been doing it, there have been many countries or companies from countries that have come to invest in Hollywood. And most of them seem to feel like they've been taken for a ride in some way. The idea of stupid money or other people's money was very, Hollywood has always been very good at convincing people to invest a lot of money, which hasn't been particularly successful. So we've looked at that from the point of view of lots of different clients from other countries. Where does it differ with India? I'm not sure that it is, different in nature, except number one, English language is incredibly important because having represented many clients who come from countries where English is not the first language, even if they speak English, it has always been a big disadvantage in the dealings. I really would reiterate what Skye said about tax, money leaving the country. I mean, I have been involved in these transactions where that is the last thing addressed instead of the first thing addressed. And people get very antsy at the end when they find out the whole deal has to be restructured. And they don't, and talking about trust, I think that is another thing that, you know, it's one thing, I guess, if it's reliance, but on the smaller deals, we have independent films financed by wealthy individuals from all over the world, and India's no exception. And I think that when people find out that their actual, people here they focus on their own business and they don't realize that it's difficult to send money from India or China. And when you tell them that, they don't necessarily believe you. They think that your client isn't paying. And so I think there's some education that needs to go on
Absolutely.
as well. And, but culturally, I'm just delighted that you've come here and are doing this conference, because I believe we need voices from all over the world in the media, and I'm delighted to see that the younger generation particularly embraces that in a way that perhaps, you know, the 75% of the industry, the reversal reflects that too. So.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very good. Nitin, maybe you can tell a strategy to deal with India, I think, in light of all that has been
It's
said.
fascinating to hear from folks who actually facilitate the deal-making process, because the view as somebody who was on the client side of actually making a deal happen is a lot more complex. So, you know, as much as deal-making is about culture and it is about, you know, a lot of the things that were talked about by each of the members on the panel here, I think I've had the chance to look at a couple of deals while I was in India. Now I've moved here through their life cycle, and it's quite a different experience sitting as, you know, as an investor who's looking to build a brand in an extremely fragmented content market and building a branded entertainment company there. So for those of you who don't know, I work for the Walt Disney Company. I've been with them for 6 years. And I started my career with Disney in India as the head of strategy and business development, looking to establish our branded content footprint in India. That journey was quite fascinating. Even before you think about a deal, quite frankly, for a company that's looking to build a brand for 100 or 200 years in a new country that is as fragmented and as challenging as India is from a local content standpoint, there has to be a lot of time and energy spent on the actual strategy articulation of what would it take to build this brand, and what foundation do we really need to lay for all our investments to pay off, not only in the next 5, 10, 15 years, but the next 20, 30, 40 years. So our valuation models, for those of you who are from the world of valuation, take a very long view of how to do business. And we don't rely on investment bankers because we believe we can do it on our own. And we do a pretty good job of that for the most part. But that is an excruciatingly painful process that has to go through a lot of marination before you even think about a deal. Once you actually start thinking about a deal, a whole bunch of other can of worms starts to open up, right? There's the actual deal negotiation process, which obviously has its challenges given the culture and the communication and all of that. But because we spend so much time articulating the strategy through that articulation process, we do a fairly rigorous job of figuring out what would be the right cultural fit for us from an acquisition standpoint or from a joint venture standpoint. And therefore, the actual negotiation process of dealing with a third, you know, with a potential partner is pretty straightforward. I don't think the cultural barriers tend to play that big of a role through the negotiation process. But I would say that the one thing that was ridiculously complex, and I think the scale of deals that I've done were quite significant for the media and entertainment space in India, was the actual regulatory process. As much as the Indian regulatory system is a lot more supportive of foreign direct investment and all of that, the way you need to navigate that regulatory machine to make a deal happen on timelines was quite an eye-opener. Having to make multiple rounds to the Parliament House, to the cabinet, to a whole bunch of people to actually get a deal some momentum is quite a task in itself in a country like India. And even through that process, quite frankly, the deal economics changed significantly because of exchange rate fluctuations. In our case, we were we actually benefited from it because the rupee depreciated in India. But the reality of it is, the point I'm trying to make is that the actual deal-making process, as simple as it is on paper, to actually make it happen through the regulatory process, is still pretty challenging in a country like India. And then the last part of it, which is once you've made the deal happen, the actual integration of the asset into your mainstream is sometimes given the least consideration. And we as the Walt Disney Company spend a lot of time and energy about how to integrate this asset in a way that is going to be sustainable and strategically advantageous to a company like ours. And by the way, there are no easy answers there, because ultimately organizations are about people and trust. And so the more time you spend through the strategy articulation process and screening process of your partners, the better off you are through that whole process. So those are my three sort of big
Thank you.
takeaways about strategy, deal execution, and post-merger integration.
Wonderful. I would ask my partner Gowree to just reflect on what has already been said and how do you navigate and what kind of issues you encounter, and then we open up to interaction with the
Sure.
audience.
I was just looking at the theme of this conference where we are talking about the
Can
future.
you take mic closer to you? And
Looking at the theme of this conference, which we are looking at the future, and this morning we had so many things being discussed as to where the content is getting created, who is creating content, crowdsourcing, etc. Then we are talking about international sales, international distribution. So on the one side, you have the technology and content creators who are looking at the world as a whole, and then creating strategies around that. And you have, on the other hand, who are lawmakers who are trying to pin down the structures to the jurisdiction. For example, Sky mentioned about tax. You have, now more and more countries are looking at substance rather than shell companies. You have, co-production treaties where you need to earn your points in a particular jurisdiction. So it's according to me, getting very tough for, as lawyers when we are looking at, talking to clients, understanding their strategies, understanding the bigger picture. But when we have to actually pen it down on paper, these are all the hurdles, the tax issues, the exchange control issues, when you are talking about the online models, you have payment gateway issues, payment system issues. So, somewhere it's getting really difficult to create these structures. The second thing, probably on the culture, a lot has been spoken, and I have, represented clients, both in the US and India. One important thing that one has to understand when you are doing deal in India is patience. The other thing, when we spoke about the culture, there is no one culture in India. You have to look at the industry in which you're working, the city in which you're working, the family who's basically owning that company. You need to really do a due diligence. When we talk about the legal and financial due diligence, according to me, a cultural due diligence is equally important, including the FCPA issues. I'm sure in the US it's huge, and that is one clause that gets extremely negotiated when we do deals, and we have to explain on both sides how to dilute those clauses, what is possible, what is not possible, etc. The second thing, probably what we would want to discuss during the question answer, there are a lot of issues on the IP. There is a lot of perception whether India protects IP to the appropriate level or not. So I will not deal with that right now, but we'll be happy to take questions around that. The other thing, I think AVT mentioned about the fund structures. We have begun to see a lot of media fund coming up in the material that we have circulated. We have given a small chapter on how the media funds are working now. A lot of Indian companies, Indian investors are looking at creating these cross-border funds where you will have dual structures, one offshore, one onshore, and they are looking at actually funding not only films in India but also outside the global films. So that's an interesting development. A lot of Indian investors are looking at these offshore investment deals, and where they are interested in participating in these fund structures. So these are some initial comments. Happy to take questions on any of the points.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think if you want more answers, you've got a whole library that we have given to you. So please read them next vacation or Even on your flights, on weekends, there's never a single dull moment in India, you know. So in the context of India, you need to really integrate your strategy into the law and tax and stuff like that. In fact, most of the international tax problems we see from IP. Most people think tax is tax, but majority of the international tax problems, or 70–80%, are all around IP, whether it's royalties, technical services fees, or other kind of stuff, intangibles, and all those things that you constantly talk about. So you cannot just isolate IP and tax, and those have become India exchange controls about movement of currency in and out and investment and those kind of things that are sometimes difficult to navigate through. So you got a whole battery of lawyers here. Anyone wants some help? But today it's free. Anyway, I think is this a good time to open up to questions or any comment? If anybody has any experience, anything you want to say.
I have a question.
Okay. Please.
So I think we basically fundamentally spoke about film. Most people have spoke about film, which is increasingly becoming a smaller and smaller part of the world of media and entertainment. I think in the acquisitions that you're talking about with Disney, it encompassed a television company that also had, as an asset, it had I mean, you know which company I'm talking about, as a gaming company. But it was fundamentally a large part of acquisitions in India are really people trying to get a foot into the door by buying existing companies so that there is a potential possibility. But there's another move that's going on in India and China, is the proliferation of content through social media. Let me just put something out there, where you're finding that actually you're not investing directly in companies, but there are media funds coming in. If you take this idea of, well, one of the big stories, India's story keeps changing. One day we are the greatest middle class in the world, the next day we're not. So it's how we hype ourselves constantly to get investment in, but we're very good at that. But don't worry about it. But sometimes there is, I mean, the biggest story right now is e-tailing. Last year, we said we couldn't go into e-retail, and this year, there's, what's the name of the company that's suddenly been valued at $1 billion?
Flipkart.
Yeah, you see, everybody knows Flipkart. Now, why? Why? All of us are media people. How come we know about Flipkart, right? We know about Flipkart because we do know that Flipkart will sell movies, it will sell books. Will it become India's iTunes? Is it heading towards that? Is it heading towards becoming a content company? The idea that e-retailing and content are becoming the same business, or content distribution is becoming the same business. In this world of convergence, it's not just product convergence. It's a convergence of where do you go? It's a question where it's like a big mall. Where do you go? Do I go to Flipkart just to buy a washing machine? But I also go to buy books. I also go to buy films. How long did it take Apple to actually become a creator of content? How long before the technology companies become creators? How long before Flipkart says, hey, what's going on here? I sell so many DVDs and so many videos and so much online stuff that I can produce my own online stuff. Then there's suddenly content creators. And the financing of these is completely different. It's a completely different model. It's not actually investment. These are funds that put money in. Sequoia puts money in. Sequoia is based in the Silicon Valley. So I'd like somebody to take on, and let me tell you where we're going. 4G is coming up in India. The youngest teenage population in the world exists in one country called India, right? The moment, and this population has been suppressed. You walk down the villages of India, you find a population that is completely suppressed. The only thing they want to do is to have their voice heard. The only thing they want to do is for the world to hear that voice. Now you suddenly connect them to the rest of the world. The youngest, 15% of the world's teenagers live in India. Teenagers are defining, we were talking about teenagers defining who are the YouTube stars. 15% of the world's teenagers living in one country are not going to, and connect them suddenly to the rest of the world through 4G, they're not going to change the world? Of course they're going to change the world. So is India going to become the world's next influence economy? When India becomes the world's next influence economy, It is in social media. It is entertainment. It is media. It is content. Are you going to be sitting in a boardroom here saying, oh my God, we missed India. We missed the biggest influence economy in the world. What are we doing? Why didn't we think about it? We should have listened to that idiotic film director called Shekhar Kapur when he talked about it. It's true. Now, I'm just posing that question. So when we're talking about, are we out of date? When we're saying film fund, is film passé? It's gone. It's 1%. To India, come on. 2% of the world's box office, India. And I'm talking about India becoming the world's influence economy. There's something happening that is completely different. What are the financing models for that? What are the various, and Nishith Desai is one of the biggest, the company makes some of the biggest media funds in the world as long as they originate with India or Indians. So where are we at with the financing? That's my question. What about these media funds? What about Secure? What about these people? Are they looking at India? What about a company that's 6, 7 years old is suddenly worth $1 billion? What about a company that's worth, no media company, no film company, no television company in India is worth $1 billion? These are two people, two guys who sat down and did it. Question, yes.
This actually is one of my favorite subjects because I agree with Shekhar.
Yes.
I think that, we've talked about, and, Bollywood is about the film business, and everyone hears about Bollywood, and it is a shrinking business, a fairly mature business, and it's a saturated business. The real opportunities, in my opinion, exist outside of the film business. They exist in mobile, they exist in digital, television. We have a very mature television market. There's no HBO of India, there's no AMC of India. There's tremendous opportunities in India for those types of situations. The whole mobile space, you've got 1 billion people with 800 million cell phones. There's just a tremendous opportunity.
900 million?
Even more.
Any other takers?
Yeah.
I mean, just think about that number. It's astounding. And so, if you're not focusing on those opportunities, Shekhar's right, you're really missing the boat. And that, I think, is where the future opportunities in India lie.
I'd love to have been a fly on the wall when somebody said, oh, let's bring cell phones into India. What? Only 50 million phones in India, maybe 5 million. Indians can't read, they can't write, they won't be able to type, they won't be able to read what's on the cell phone. 10 years later, 850, 900 million cell phone connections. Then what do they say? But these are not going to be smartphones. Well, just basic telephone, that's all a person needs. 25% of cell phones now sold in India are smartphones. The Chinese phones are coming in as so cheap. We tried to stop them. They cannot be stopped. It's cheap. They do everything an Apple iPhone can do for about 1/100 the price. So India is becoming now. I'm a filmmaker. There's an infrastructure. China is making 9 screens a day they're adding, every day. 9, most of them digital, many of them 3D, 9 screens a day being added. We are stuck with 15 or 14 or 15,000 screens for 600 films. So, sorry? 11,400 screens. Anybody want to take another one? But 11,400 screens. But, hang on, 4G is coming. People are desperate to consume content. What am I going to make my film for? 11,000 screens or 800 million cell phones? Where am I going to stream my phone? And who's investing in that? Who's looking at that?
So I'd like to just make a point on that because all very good points, Shekhar. In fact, back in even 2008, when we were looking at our opportunities as a blue sky, thinking about where the future is headed, here's where the dissonance comes in. And by the way, I think there was one word mentioned by, I think, Gowree, you, which was really about patience. And I think what happens with India is there comes a tipping point. The problem is for most American companies to decide when to invest, being part of an American company is really at the heart of the issue. We've all talked about 4G. By the way, the 4G licenses, for those of you who don't know, were given out in 2009. We're sitting in 2014 now. And I don't know if anybody has 4G in India yet. I doubt there is anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So the point, I mean, there are some patches of 4G available, but this whole ubiquity of broadband availability so that people can watch all sorts of content is still largely a pipe dream given all the constraints that you see, whether it's on the infrastructure side, whether it's on the...
I'm going to give you another pipe dream.
Yeah.
Many, many years ago, video was banned in India.
Right.
They said, oh, who cares? Video? In India, people won't be able to buy a video machine. What's video? They don't know what video is. Video will be intrusive. It'll sell anti-government propaganda. All of this video will never come to India, right? Within 5 years, it almost destroyed the film business. So there is something about India that you feel, and then suddenly the hockey stick curve
Exactly.
takes over.
It's
And
really
when the
about that
hockey
tipping
stick,
point.
what takes over is people's aspirations.
That's right.
We have 65% of India is under 25, something like that? 30%, huh?
Below 35.
Below 35. These are very aspirational people. The moment they get hold of something, everything changes really fast. Like you saw with Flipkart. Oh, come on, there are no credit cards in India. People don't want to have credit cards. Who will go in for e-retailing? Suddenly, this company is taking over everything. So it's just that one place where you get what happens, and then the hockey stick
right.
curve takes over.
Thank you.
But
I think,
Shekhar, just to answer, I think there are a lot of funds who are, looking at even the startups, in, for example, India, Silicon Valley, Bangalore, you will see a lot of interest in these startups who are coming out with newer technologies or newer ways of distribution, newer businesses. For example, there is, a tie-up now between Bombay Stock Exchange and a Canadian university called Ryerson. They are now basically, mentoring the startups in this particular space. So you will see a lot of development in this space, and funds are actually looking at these companies.
You know the problem,
Thank-
and then we'll open this up. The thing about India right now is the largest pool of IT technologists that are English-speaking is in India. In 2 years or a year, Bangalore will have more IT technologists than all of Silicon Valley put together. The problem with private equity investments in India, they don't trust India. They want very short-term returns. What they do is they invest in a company and then push a company to show very high returns in their balance sheets. And sometimes they're ruining the companies by doing that. And so they show those returns, they get out, and the company's worth nothing after that. That's a big problem with investments
So
in
thank
India.
you very much. I think brilliant comment. We have about 6 minutes or 4 minutes officially. So I'll permit another 4 minutes. So Bhuvan, can you just give a quick comment, 30 seconds? Or
Thanks, Mr. Desai. I must first and foremost congratulate you, FICCI, and Shekhar for organizing this at a very
Thank you.
timely situation. For those who don't know, the Prime Minister Modi is in Washington today, and they have signed a very big deal with the United States. It's going to be made public later today. In the last 10 years, $20 billion worth of investments have happened between US and India. In the next 5 years, they are preparing for a roadmap for $500 billion. The idea is now in India to create product which can be sold worldwide. The Make in India campaign has been launched just last week. The other development which is significant for all those who are wanting to do business with India is that India is not only the single largest democracy in the world, it is also the youngest, fastest growing, free market, free trade country in the world today. And besides the huge number of youngsters going on to the 4G and stuff, the next generation India is going to be the fastest growing internet savvy social media groups in the world. So we are going to enter a completely new paradigm. For those who have done business in India till now, you haven't seen anything as yet.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That lady, everyone will get chance, don't worry. Yeah, you can push that button.
Okay. I don't know if anyone brought up the Indo-Chinese co-production treaty. So my first question is, A, does it really actually have any relevance to productions in the future? And secondly, for those of you who've done business with China, does Hong Kong or using Hong Kong as a route to get into China really help make laws tangible and finance more tangible than the obscure Chinese entertainment industry? Thank you.
I had a chat with Jeffrey yesterday, and Jeffrey is a bit of an Indophile, said he's dying to get something together with India and China. So do you want to take that question?
wasn't paying as much attention. So,
你好.
oh. Do you mind to repeat the question again?
First of all, the Indo-Chinese co-production treaty was recently seen. Does it actually have any true relevance in practical terms? And I'll mention a second question after this.
It's just happening.
Okay, as far as I know, China has many treaties with many different countries so far. So it's not, I would not say it would be a driver that would make things happen, but it would be, as compared, because it's happening with a lot of other countries. That recently they signed a treaty with the UK, United Kingdom. And so it's something probably would better to have as a background. And to the question about Hong Kong, because I'm from Hong Kong actually, as some of you know, I would say it's not a must. I think it really depends on your situation, your company's background, whether it makes better sense for you to be to have the first foothold in Hong Kong instead of. But being from a Hong Konger, how they call us, I think Hong Kong has the experience or the background of doing international corporations or filmmakings with other part of the world. Maybe probably you would be able to, if you haven't started anything with China, it would be beneficial for you to look at Hong Kong and see maybe you can find a so-called middleman to help you to get through the maze in China.
Yeah. I think all these treaties are like spice on your food, so you know it makes it a little tastier and makes you feel good. I think that draws your attention as well. I think that lady there, if you
Hi. So this was just to bring out more relevant points in terms of screen density in India, and this is for all the investors who are really looking at investing in content later. But to increase the relevance of the value chain, I think FICCI is really putting a lot of effort in terms of bringing policy change. But what is exactly for 11,400 screens? How do you break them down into smaller screens? There are regulations that really tie up, but people should, or investors should consider in investing on infrastructural basis, because in India, entertainment is more for escape, not just watching a real spice of life. That is the reason Bollywood really survives, is because people want to watch aspirational content. Their lives are a struggle. I was there, so my life was a struggle from morning to night anyway. So if I wanted to escape and watch entertaining content, I would love Bollywood. But so how do we reduce the screen size of the existing infrastructural setups? There are screen theater owners who are going bankrupt and are really suffering. So how can foreign investments or FDIs can really help them reduce the screen size, make it profitable, convert it into another, digitize it probably in smaller towns and cities. Second thing is a research. A Nielsen report covering 15,000 households do not really represent the 1 billion population that watches television or films in the country. And how are we really justifying a TAM report or a RAM report in terms of defining the content that people like? The young India, and I come from that particular strata, is actually feeding on Games of Thrones, is feeding on American content day in and day out. They don't like to watch.
Thank you. I think.
How are we defining research which is content relevant? And that's a question to, I would really like Mr. Nitin Chawla to really answer this question as to how are you really defining research based on what your content is coming out? Like what are you, how are numbers justifying
Sorry, I
it?
just want to drop in. How about this for screen size?
I'm a digital aggregator myself for a lot of digital independent
we
films.
don't have to worry about screens anymore. Everybody has a screen.
No, but people do like the theatrical experience. Yeah. Filmmakers are attached to the theatrical releases. Yeah. I would love you to release your film digitally worldwide. Would you do that in the first go?
Yeah. Okay, Nitin.
Nitin, yeah, we have less than
like
60 seconds.
We can take it as a sidebar conversation, but I can say this. I think what you're seeing in India right now is a massive flux as a result of digitization. what you're seeing is a significant amount of structural changes in all the adjacent industries, including, quite frankly, audience research. And I know it's a hotly debated topic in India these days. I've been out of it for the last year or so, but I have a close friend who's actually the CEO of one of these companies. And I can tell you this, I think this particular area, given the relevance of accurate and reliable research, is getting disproportionate time and attention, not only from all the content creators and platforms, but also from the government. So whether we like it or not, I think it's only a question of time whether it fixes itself. But we are in a state of flux where you're not going to get a good sense for what content is really resonating. But it's actually a passing phase, and I think much like other mature countries, once digital penetration takes over, it's only a question of time when research catches up. So we are in a catch-up mode on a research side right now.
Thank you so much for you.
Yeah,
We are running short of time. We
very
have
quick
about a minute to go.
One quick point I'd just make is that when digital content started, making its appearance, people just started to believe that traditional mode would die. And there were two camps: the people who felt the traditional model will die and this is the new way, and the other camp who thought this is just a passing phase and the old style will come. It coexists in a world where today you'll get 3 hours a week from someone in the cinema, you'll get another 10 to 14 or 15 hours from them on television, and what you've now got access is to time you never had before, time when they're sitting in the lavatory, on a train, in their living room, places where they couldn't access things. Now it depends on how you use it. And the Flipkart fact is that if they don't have something to watch in that time, they'll buy something in that time. It's really up to people who are creating mechanisms to access that time, how they get people to interface with them. But it's not that one is dying over the other. They coexist. We have access to more of people's time in entertainment and media than we have ever had before.
I think, let me tell you one thing, that lunch was so good, all the speakers, everybody is going to be at dinner as well. I take it that way, right? So please have more interaction at that time. I think we are trying to move a little fast so that the other panel could come up. Any other person in Sky or anyone you want to say anything else?
Let me,
so we can.
since we're supposed to be touching on the ground, supposedly, which we didn't get close to, let me just give for the filmmakers out there some ideas of where financing is coming, and I can do it in probably 1 minute. If you're looking for cash, right? Advertisers, all right? Advertisers are flooding the creating content. Think Lego, think Hasbro. This is if you're looking for equity, think advertisers. Second, anyone who has a footprint with the consumer, if you're looking for money, what I call the retailers, Netflix, the theaters. Walmart is financing original content. I just did Crouching Tiger 2, which is in the press today. If Netflix is doing direct day and date release. And to answer the question about India, I bet Netflix, I'm betting on invading India as well as it's invaded Europe. Think foreign money, think China, think tax subsidies on every single film. You've got to think about how much where you always need some equity base to start the process. Slate financing is back. I'm going to do a big Chinese, you're going to read about shortly, a big Chinese deal financing a studio slate. So slate financing is back in a big way, and then crowdfunding on the smaller level is also a viable technique. There's different methods of crowdfunding. One is freebie, which is the Kickstarter, and one is equity model, which is like slated. But so you've got to bifurcate which they are, but they're both viable methods for smaller finance, for smaller films.
Wonderful. I think let's, I know there are more questions, but we have really run out of the time, and we are almost behind by 8 minutes. So we want to make sure that we don't cut short the next one as well. I really want to thank everyone here. I think there has been so much wealth of knowledge around, and please feel free to interact with them in the breaks or otherwise. So with that, say thank you all. Can we have a big round of applause for them?